offered clues as to why they turned to murder.
With John Duffy, I feel, he would acknowledge himself that he was aroused to the idea of rape, but it would appear that David was deviantly sexually aroused to violence. It seemed that it was more important to him to issue threats and be aggressive.
With Duffy aroused by rape, the pair's serial attacks were presumably satisfying him. But Mulcahy was different. As a man turned on by violence, it seems logical to me that he'd want the pair to go further, that he'd want to kill.
Alison Day was 19 years old in December 1985 when she caught a train to Hackney Wick Station in East London. It was her tragic luck that Duffy and Mulcahy would be waiting for her. The assault went on as normal, brutal and well organised, until Mulcahy made an apparent mistake. He used John Duffy's name.
It's almost as though Mulcahy set the scene where Alison Day would have to die because he'd called John Duffy by his name, and they had all sorts of strategies worked out where they would never do that. And I think it was, in a way, it gave permission for Mulcahy to take it to that next step, that this woman would have to die because she'd be able to identify them and heard one of their names. Initially, the death of Alison Day prompted a tightening of their bond, really.
After Mulcahy had strangled Alison with a tourniquet, the pair threw her body into the River Lee navigation. With this act, Duffy and Mulcahy graduated from mass rapists to murderers. The pair were clearly living double lives, but how did they appear to the outside world? It was time to meet some people who knew the pair during their campaign of rape and murder. I headed first to meet a man still close to David Mulcahy. Oddly, in the mid-1980s, Mulcahy had become fanatical about roller skating. Junior Mayhew was his skating buddy.
I met Dave when we was roller skating in Battersea Park. Everybody used to go there on a Sunday, and he was learning to skate, and I basically helped him.
And you became friends pretty quickly and stayed?
Well, we used to go there every Sunday and skate around, and then we'd skate during the week. We had a little reputation of always kind of like skating, holding on to buses and stuff like this,
right.
and we had a great time. But John Duffy was never part of that equation.
But did he talk about John Duffy? Was he somebody that you mentioned?
John Duffy was a name, but that was all, because when we used to talk, we was always talking about skating and stuff that we were doing.
As Junior spoke, it became apparent to me that he believed his friend David Mulcahy is innocent.
I spent a lot of time around Dave's house.
Yeah.
In fact, I actually lived there at one time and never saw John Duffy come into the house.
As far as you knew, he was just some guy that David had been at school with, that he saw now and again, but that was part of his history.
Part of his past, the way I would see it, because he spent most of his present time with me and my friends. David is one of these people that will go out of his way to help just about anybody. He was always a really friendly guy. You only have to pick up the phone and say, hey, look, Dave, I've got this problem. Can you help me? And he's there.
Junior clearly still thinks his friend is no rapist or murderer. What's remarkable to me is how Mulcahy has been able to pull the wool over the eyes of so many people. Perhaps this explains how he remained undetected for so long.
He was the kind of person that the next door neighbours would say, oh yeah, he's a great guy, if I come down with my shopping bags, he'll help me in. And he would. But he would also rape your daughter or your wife.
Unlike David Mulcahy, John Duffy was a more obviously peculiar character. Mother and son Winnie and Martin Thomas knew Duffy well when he worked at their local community centre and lived at the end of their street in Kilburn, North London. The pair remember a more introverted man than his partner in crime.
Well, I first met John when I used to work in the youth club on the estate. and he used to do working with children in the hall, doing activities like snooker, football, darts, or table tennis and things like that.
And what did you make of him first few times you met him?
Well, you know, he used to be a bit bossy with me to make him tea or coffee.
Right.
And used to sit on the counter and used to swing his legs, make me go, and I'd say, well, no, I'm going home now. I mean, it was 12 o'clock at night. And then he used to walk me home.
He was very quiet.
Yeah.
Very withdrawn and very quiet. And he wouldn't come to you and ask you a question if he sees you first. I think, you know, he'd just look at you, pass you by.
But there was a more worrying indication of the serial rapist he turned into than just social awkwardness, and that was his behaviour towards his wife.
I heard that he used to beat his wife. That's what I was told.
And who told you that?
People in the block. People in the block where he lived. I think she did tell someone that he was doing it, to someone in the block, who lived in the block.
But Duffy didn't just beat his wife, he had raped her too. It was a crime that brought him to the attention of the police and would ultimately prove his undoing. Yet for now, Duffy and Mulcahy continued their attacks unabated. And it was around this time that Martin was invited into John Duffy's flat for a cup of tea with him and with his friend David Mulcahy.
We're very interested in how the two of them were together because they committed these awful crimes together. Yeah. And as somebody who had you had the opportunity to see them on a social level having a cup of tea, how were they? What can you remember?
David was more chatty and sociable than John. I just find John just, sit there and listen and not even say anything as a response. It's more like questions and answers. When you go to their flat, it's like you have to ask them a question for them to answer you. Otherwise, you'll be sitting there thinking, oh, we ain't saying nothing.
Duffy and Mulcahy had a lot they wouldn't talk to anyone about. The two men Martin shared tea with were on their way to becoming serial killers. In December 1985, the pair's crimes took a still more brutal turn when they strangled 19-year-old Alison Day close to Hackney Wick Station in East London.
Moving from rape to murder is not unknown. The reason for that is often halfway through or at a point within this criminal career is that they realise they're leaving a lot of evidence and the potential for getting caught is kind of like escalating very rapidly with the number of offences. And what will sometimes happen is they will realise that unless they dispose completely of this person and their testimony, then the chances of getting caught are increasing to the point where it would be unsustainable.
And Alison Day would not be the last victim that Duffy and Mulcahy would so viciously dispose of. Four months later, in April 1986, the railway killers headed far from their North London homes to Horsley in the Surrey commuter belt. It was there the pair killed 15-year-old schoolgirl Margie Tamboza. I headed to meet the police officer who had led the investigation into Margie Tamboza's murder.
This was a young girl who was cycling along a footpath to go and get some sweets to take on a school trip that she was going with her other friends. The following day, her cycle was found up against a tree and her body was found the following morning in a field there. And it was pretty clear that she had died following a sexual assault and then with a tourniquet round her neck. And clearly, we made our minds up, we just have to find this man as quick as we can. We were very worried that whoever this person was at that stage could murder again.
Where the first victim, Alison Day, had been strangled with a tourniquet by Mulcahy, it was John Duffy who had killed Tamboza using the same method. I wondered why Mulcahy had not killed Tamboza too. After all, he was described as the violent one. Psychologist Jenny Cutler suggested it was because Mulcahy feared that Duffy's conscience was getting to him, and he needed Duffy to prove it wasn't.
I think if he had any sense, I think he would have been able to see that perhaps John Duffy, expressed guilty feelings. And I think that should have suggested to him that there might come a time when, John would feel he had to stop what was happening.
But that time showed no sign of arriving. There were 2 mass rapists turned killers at large, and the police needed to start piecing together the evidence from the different attacks.
Charles Farquhar was investigating the murder of Alison Day, who was found in a canal. He got in touch with me and said, look, I think we need to talk because I've got similarities in my murder case with your murder case. In both instances, they'd had a cloth pushed into their mouths and there was a tourniquet round the neck for where they were actually suffocated.
The police were starting to make links between these 2 murders and the earlier rapes and drawing up a list of suspects. Because of his conviction for raping his wife, John Duffy was placed on that list, along with 1,800 other known sex offenders. As the police began to whittle their list down, worrying news arrived of another missing person.
Sometime after that, in May, Anne Locke went missing, with similar circumstances involving the railway station, lone lady leaving the station in the evening to pick up her cycle and cycle home, had disappeared.
Anne Locke was indeed victim number 3. At Brookman's Park Station in Hertfordshire, Duffy and Mulcahy had spied one lone lady's bike in the bike shed, waited for the owner to appear, and then pounced. Her body was found in nearby fields 6 weeks later. Mulcahy and Duffy were now serial killers, but I was surprised to learn that Duffy also continued to commit rape, this time alone. And on his own, Duffy took less care, giving the police the breakthrough they needed, a clear description.
There were 2 cases of rape, almost identical to the murder inquiry and the other rapes. The man or the suspect was short, with curly hair and had quite severe acne. We decided that we would have a serious look at Duffy. We searched his parents' home and found the various items we were looking for, like the butterfly knives and the tissues and the matchboxes and so on. Also, we seized a ball of string, which quite a large ball of string, which was subsequently identical to the string that Marty Tambo's had been tied up with. So all these things were beginning to actually come together.
This evidence, along with the positive ID at identity parades, told police they had the man they were looking for. John Duffy was the railway rapist turned railway killer. But what about the second man earlier rape victims had spoken about? What about David Mulcahy?
Was the notion of a second man brought up during the initial questioning of John Duffy, with Duffy?
Yes, it was. But of course he said nothing about anything. We did a lot of background inquiries on him and found that his only best friend and the person he really only associated with was David Mulcahy. So he was arrested and placed on identification parade, whereas Duffy was picked out by various rape victims and other witnesses who saw him at various locations. Mulcahy was not picked out at all.
Why do you think that was? Looking back
in
on
hindsight, I now know that the victims were terrified, and I know that some of them felt they recognised him but just didn't pick him out.
Was it the sort of identification parade where they were face to face,
or
exactly. They weren't behind glass?
No, those days had not started. The current system had not started in this particular time.
Right.
And it was generally accepted that they walked along a line and looked at sort of 12 people and had to touch or pick them out or whatever it might be.
Oh, that must have been horrendous to suddenly find themselves face to face with the man who had attacked them.
Yeah, particularly young girls, you see. It was absolutely terrifying, and even the older ones just absolutely terrified to have to do that.
With no positive ID and DNA evidence to think of the future, Mulcahy would remain free for more than 10 years. The police had nothing on him except his friendship with Duffy, and Duffy wasn't talking. At trial, Duffy was convicted of 7 rapes and the first 2 murders, those of Alison Day and Margie Tamboza. The body of the 3rd victim, Alison Locke,